18-142, offered by Mr. Burlison of Missouri.
Pursuant to House Resolution 583, the gentleman from Missouri and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge all of my colleagues to support this amendment to eliminate the Diversity and Inclusion Deputy Inspector General, to prohibit the establishment of new diversity, equity, and inclusion positions within the DoD, and to prohibit the Secretary from filling any vacancies for DEI positions. For years, the left has forced radical and unpopular ideas into our very institutions that are under the cover of DEI policies. But DEI initiatives and policies are not about making everyone feel like they belong. It is a smokescreen. Instead of uniting us, it's about dividing us. It's about dividing our country into separate groups that are based on identity and conforming to a radical agenda that replaces our shared American identity instead with a tribalism, with a tribal collectivism. And you know what? It's a disgrace to our political and military leaders who have allowed this to occur in the Department of Defense. You see, the DoD's mission is not that. Its mission instead is to provide the military forces that are needed to deter war and ensure the nation's security. But dividing our troops and the DoD employees by race and identity does nothing but distract from the mission of addressing real and imminent threats to the U.S. national security. In reality, woke indoctrination serves as only one of these very threats. And DEI in the military breeds hostility among the enlisted by focusing on identity-driven grievances instead of bringing people together instead of unity. It undermines that shared American identity and a patriotic love of country that compelled our dedicated service members to join in the first place. The U.S. military is one of our last great merit-based institutions that is still standing. Millions of selfless patriots serve our country, but their service is exploited by the wokeness and the religion of DEI. Instead of judging our service members based on merit, they are judged by identity. Instead of having a unified body of men and women who are ready to defend our nation, we have a unified group, or we have a group of people who are fragmented into the belief of their gender identities. Instead of men and women who are armed in the armed services being trained in readiness, their time is wasted learning whatever new woke ideology comes out of leftist universities. This is not acceptable, and we have to stop this madness before it's too late. That's why I filed this amendment. This amendment repeals the DEI Inspector General at the DoD and prohibits the establishment of new DEI positions. Specifically, it prohibits the Secretary from establishing any new DEI positions at the DoD. The DoD will not be able to fill any DEI vacancies that might come up. This amendment simply eliminates these unnecessary taxpayer-funded positions, and that's it. I urge my colleagues to adopt this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
On reserves, for what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
I rise to claim the time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Washington State, Ms. Strickland.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment will eliminate the Inspector General position responsible for overseeing diversity and inclusion efforts in the military. My colleagues across the aisle must understand the full purpose of this office. Number one, it's tasked with supporting effective evidence-based programs on diversity and inclusion. And number two, it's responsible for responding to extremism and criminal gang activity within our Department of Defense. This amendment eliminates the investigators who are responsible for weeding out criminal efforts in our government, the same investigators who keep our military accountable to the people we serve. Mr. Chair, is it my colleagues' intent to support these criminal activities? Because eliminating the deputy inspector position is exactly the message this sends to our department and the American people. Researchers at the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism looked at 3 decades of extremist attacks in the U.S., and they found that the military background is the most commonly shared characteristic among extremists who committed or plotted mass casualty attacks from 1990 through 2022. Offenders with military backgrounds were 2.5 times more likely to be classified as a mass fatality perpetrator than extremists who don't serve in the armed forces. Through December 2021, 120 individuals with U.S. military backgrounds were identified as participants in the violent failed coup on January 6. This is unacceptable. For our safety, for the security of our military, the U.S. must make it a priority to root out extremism in our armed forces. Eliminating this office and Deputy Inspector General sets us back. The NDAA that we passed out of committee was broadly supported in a bipartisan manner. This suite of amendments attacking DEI, validating extremism, undermines our safety and our security. Instead of putting housing, childcare, military families and their needs first, my friends across the aisle are choosing to fail them. I strongly oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman reserves.
I do.
The gentleman from Missouri has 1 minute remaining and is recognized.
Yeah. Yeah, are you okay? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield 1 minute to my colleague from the great state of Texas, Mr. Chip Roy.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank my friend. Earlier today, the ranking member of the House Rules Committee accused me of offering a racist amendment. It was racist. And that was because it was said that we shouldn't have policies under DEI encouraging that any race is inherently superior or inferior to any other race, color, or national origin, the United States being a fundamentally racist country. The Declaration of Independence or Constitution of the United States are fundamentally racist documents. An individual's moral character or worth is determined by the individual's race, color, or national origin. An individual, by virtue of the individual's race, is inherently racist or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously, or that an individual, because of the individual's race, bears responsibility for the actions committed by other members of the individual's race, color, or national origin. The fact is, we have DEI positions like that held by Calissa Wing, where she talked about caudacity to say that black people can be racist too. That's what's happening. We're inculcating racist positions in the Department of Defense. I support my friend's amendment to strike these racist positions. The Department of Defense should be colorblind so we can defend the United States of America instead of having social engineering experiments that are wrapped in a uniform. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlelady from Alabama, Ms. Sewell.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong opposition to this amendment. Like so many of the Republican amendments that were shockingly made in order, this is yet another tragic attempt to gut DOD of any efforts to increase diversity and decrease extremism. Let me be clear, this provision will only hurt our national security and readiness. So some 41% of our military members are minorities, and that number will continue to grow. So it's unbelievable to me why my colleagues across the aisle are so opposed to ensuring that nearly half of our servicemen and women feel seen, heard, and supported as they defend our country. And as we continue to face recruitment and retention challenges, we should be using every tool in the toolbox to recruit the best and the brightest. That means recruiting people of diverse backgrounds. As a black woman standing before you today, hear me when I say that this amendment is as harmful as it is hurtful. We simply should not have to defend why diversity in our nation's strength, and yet here we are. It's maddening and it's dangerous. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves.
The gentleman is the only one with time remaining.
Oh, that's okay. Stand
The
over there.
gentleman
looking
from
at me.
Washington is
Sorry,
recognized.
Okay. So their time has expired?
Correct.
I apologize. I yield 30 seconds to the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Strickland.
The gentlewoman
you.
is recognized.
Thank you. Congress must support an inspector general position that ensures military equal opportunity programs work and sounds the alarm when extremism takes root in our military. What we're seeing here today is a small group of MAGA extremists holding the NDAA hostage in their efforts to politicize the department. I urge my moderate colleagues across the aisle who don't want to fire criminal investigators, who don't want to tell our service members that they don't belong, who don't want to leave military families high and dry, to please vote no on this amendment. Use your conscience. I yield back.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I yield myself the balance of my time. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what DEI is. And there are certainly examples, and there are many anecdotes, of bad DEI, of DEI that goes too far in the opposite direction, as has been described over and over and over again. But the basic idea that we need to make sure that our military is inclusive and focus on diversity and equity, as we've argued throughout the day today, is inarguable. There is a history of racism. There is a history of sexism. There is a history of bigotry. As I pointed out, we wouldn't even allow trans or gay people to serve in many instances. Now we have allowed black people to serve in the military. They're not getting promoted at the same level. If we are going to recruit from the diverse population that we have in this country, we have to at least focus on it. If folks want to focus on some minor bad aspect of it, we can talk about that. But what you're doing is you are completely eliminating, like 10 times, talking about shooting a dead horse. We've now shot this thing like 15 times over the course of the day. You are completely eliminating any consideration of this nation's history and how we're going to recruit and retain members of the military. These amendments are terrible ideas for the national security of this country, and I once again urge a no vote on this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question